Question.
Later. Oh, all right.
Yeah, you guys referenced the Republican supermajority several times and how it's made it difficult for you guys to pass bills or sometimes even just debate the bills. And is there anything going forward? Do you guys just want any strategies or anything to try and make it easier for you to debate and pass bills in the
Well,
Assembly?
as the House Caucus Chairman, I think our strategy is to win more seats.
Same.
That's the only way this is going to happen, is when we break the supermajority, and nothing's going to change until we have the opportunity to break a quorum and have some leverage.
Absolutely. Same for the Senate.
You obviously bring up the undocumented students bill that very much had federal implications to it, because if that was to likely get challenged to go all the way to the Supreme Court, that could have federal implications. Do you believe that bills are being introduced into the Tennessee legislature with the purpose to have federal implications attached to them?
Yes. We can look back initially to the legislation we passed around Roe v. Wade. We can look back to the legislation we passed just last year about using the death penalty for sexual assault cases. We can certainly look at the comments on the record by both sponsors of this legislation, which sought to overturn Pyler v. Doe. So yes, it was said explicitly that it was a 5-4 decision 40 years ago, and with this new Supreme Court, there was a belief that they would have a different result. And unfortunately, we see litigation being passed, not just legislation. It is a tactic of my colleagues, and you see with the Attorney General's budget being more than doubled in the last couple of years, they are defending more and more lawsuits, and unfortunately, a lot of them they're losing. Or fortunately for us.
Wasting taxpayer money on legislation they know is absolutely unconstitutional.
And to that point, we've asked for numbers, disaggregated numbers, to show how much these lawsuits are costing taxpayers, and unfortunately, that data never seems to be available.
They need to report it on their campaign disclosures.
I was going to say as a follow-up to that, does it concern you, or are you all concerned that Tennessee could become a precedent-type state when it comes to legislation like that?
That ship sailed.
I mean, we already
We
are.
are.
Yeah.
My real concern is that there are real people who are impacted
Yes.
by these political ploys to
Yes.
overturn existing law. And certainly when we look at the undocumented students bill, we saw families that were devastated, living in fear of sending their kids to school, who were saying, please just allow us to be educated. And it was turned really a deaf ear and a blind eye.
I want to talk about the real cost of this, though. Like, this legislature is so disconnected from the people of Tennessee right now. While this legislature has been in session, Tennesseans have lost millions of dollars in retirement and college savings. Manufacturers and small businesses don't know about how their supply chains are going to work, facing uncertainty not seen in decades. Consumers are facing higher interest rates, higher costs, and the almost near certainty of an upcoming recession. And what did this legislature do about any of that? Nothing. Precisely nothing. Instead, all they did is they chased a bunch of culture war issues. They did a bunch of power plays, like neutering the governor when it comes to spending, like empowering the Attorney General with a new budget to be an enforcer for the legislature instead of a lawyer for the people of Tennessee. And the things that are actually going to be felt in most people's lives are taking away products like THC out of stores that people are using and rupturing the support of public school systems across the state. Those are the two things that people are going to feel, but they're following. Yeah, they want to make news in the Supreme Court. They want to, suck up to the president. But people in Tennessee have real problems, and this legislature did almost nothing to deal with them.
If someone from Memphis could, address the bill that, passed today from the conference committee report that, was a bill to basically, it was kind of designed to hold Memphis accountable and other localities accountable for stuff like gun referendums, stuff that violates the Constitution. What are y'all's thoughts on the fact that, a version of that did pass, that they came on an agreement
We
on
did
that?
not have a
Yeah,
congressman
yeah.
report.
Well, I will say, I think that the citizens of Tennessee had a right to make a statement around how they feel about guns, just like the legislature sends out plenty of resolutions making statements on issues that may not be constitutional, may be hyper-partisan. We disagree with those. And so what it is it's efforts to, if I don't like the way you and your people in your city legislate or make decisions, I'm going to hold you accountable. Now, in this budget, what you saw were extreme cuts to organizations in Memphis doing work on the ground to prevent gun violence, completely eliminating or significantly reducing the amount of money that was allocated to these organizations to provide relief or provide services on the ground to families who are most economically disadvantaged. That is direct retribution for our citizens going to the polls and saying to the Tennessee legislature, we don't want more guns on our street. Memphis is, yes, we have a crime problem right here. Guns are the leading cause of death for children in the state of Tennessee, and this legislature has passed additional legislation to expand access to guns and prohibit gun manufacturers from civil lawsuits, even though their guns may have defaults in them. And so what we're seeing is Memphis being punished for having high crime, but at the same time, the legislature passing legislation that exasperates crime and gun violence in our city. It's not fair to Memphis, and it's not fair that the legislature is restricting funding from Memphis to our community organizations doing gun violence prevention in our city. It is unconscionable. It is another form of the Republican supermajority using unchecked power to tell the people what they can and cannot do. While several things in Memphis were funded, the majority of those things had nothing to do with improving the community.
And I'll say to your point as well, Julia, it was very clear that this was retribution for a decision that the Memphis City Council made to put an ordinance around guns on the ballot. Now, what I will tell you is we all know that state law trumps local ordinances and laws, federal law trumps state law. Just like this General Assembly passes legislation that if the federal law were to change, it would immediately trigger a change in state law. Memphis and Shelby County can do the same thing. Unfortunately, what they're doing is they are creating this new level of bureaucracy to achieve the goals that they wanted to achieve by threatening to withhold funding, which is completely unconstitutional and illegal, from the city of Memphis for simply making a decision to put a ballot issue before their people. So, I mean, disappointing, more micromanaging, more telling locals what they can and cannot do when they don't want the federal government telling them the same thing.
Last one, anybody?
So since the legislature tends to pass lawsuits instead of legislation in a lot of cases, what do you think is the challenge that you're trying to go with school choice?
I think it's efforts to essentially, in my personal opinion, in some small form dismantle the public school system, because I think there is some thought that the public school system on its surface is ineffective at being able to provide everything that all families need, on which I highly disagree with them, because if we fully fund the public education system, we'll provide all the needs that all of our children, regardless of your background, will have. While I'm not against the ability for parents to choose what they want, I think that the expansion of vouchers and all of these other different efforts have hindered the public school system, which was designed to provide adequate public education to all students. And so what it is an effort to create this public-private partnership idea in the public school system, which has largely been ineffective. And what I want the majority to do is focus their energy on fully funding our public education system so that all children can have the chance to have an adequate, fully funded education with all the resources we need to continue to rise on the scale of a well-performing school district. Because right now with the laws we're seeing and all the different school choice methods, that is exactly what's not happening in all of our counties across the state.
So, this is the voucher session. That's going to be the lasting impact of this legislative session. It's the biggest change in state government in decades. And it's not going to just be this one-time thing. From now, every year for the next 2 decades, this legislature is going to have to decide whether it's going to keep expanding this voucher program to include new people, or whether it's going to fund public schools. And that's going to get harder and harder because they've also wrecked the fiscal capacity of the state. Like, we are not doing as well when it comes to revenue because of decisions this governor made to do giveaways to corporations. So there's less money, and we're now sending a ton of it to private school vouchers, and we're going to keep doing more every year. And so we know, we've talked to our colleagues across the aisle. They know that their communities didn't want this vouchers program. They didn't. They got in trouble every time they went home. There's a reason they passed it in a week, because they knew if they actually had to spend any time with their constituents while that bill was pending, that they would have had a harder time getting it done. And so they snuck that through at the beginning of the session, and we are going to be feeling the repercussions from it for a long time, and it's not going to be a good, not going to be a good thing. I mean, it is going to be hard on people's, every community in the state is going to face complications stemming from that bill.
Has there been any response from the administration on the coming federal cuts?
No.
And do you get the impression that the administration is prepared?
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is, last year's budget relied on the federal government to the tune of 42% of our entire state budget. They like to talk about how fiscally responsible they are. We all know that's a false narrative. They rely heavily on the federal government, even though they talk about cutting federal funds, and they continue to refuse and deny federal funds, our own tax dollars. So no, they don't want to face that harsh reality. They held this budget together with duct tape and Band-Aids, and it's because they have driven this state off a fiscal cliff.
Right.
Look, every one of your headlines about this session are going to read, vouchers, immigration, and DEI define this legislative session. I know that. What it should read, if Democrats were in control and there was real leadership in the governor's office, the headlines would read, Tennessee families see investments, record investments in public education, infrastructure, and access to health care, and lowering costs for working families. A focus, unprecedented focus on strengthening the middle class and making Tennessee families feel safe and secure. That's what the headline should be. But these failures are ruining the state and driving it off a fiscal cliff, and you're not going to see that type of result for the benefit of working Tennessee families until something changes, until they're held accountable. And that's what our goal is. And that's what the Tennessee people and families of this state deserve. And they should expect it and vote accordingly. Thank y'all.